Hi everyone, this is Chris Craig with Unanet, and this session is on controlling the future, budgeting, planning, and forecasting. We'll give it another 30 seconds to let a few more people join, and then we'll get started. All right, we'll go ahead and get started. Again, my name is Chris Craig with Unanet. I've been with Unanet for 19 years now, so it's been a fun run. This session is on controlling the future, budgeting, planning, and forecasting, and just a few logistics before we dive right in. We have a very brief PowerPoint overview on Unanet as a company, who we are, what we do, where we sit, and then we will go into the software and have an interactive discussion / demonstration on those features. There is a section in the GoToWebinar console. If you see the orange arrow in the GoToWebinar console, you can open and close that, and you can submit questions in the question section. And periodically, I'll try to go over and respond to those questions throughout the call. We have found over the years that the more interactive they are, the better the feedback is from participants. So if you have a question, it probably means somebody else has a question, and the whole point of this is to get your questions answered. So if you do have any questions, I'm not going to read off the name of the person that enters the question, but I'll just kind of read off the question and then try to respond to it. Also, if you're experiencing any latency within the webinar, the best way to solve that really is to just close it out and try to rejoin. GoToWebinar is pretty solid, but occasionally you'll have a hang up or something like that. So if the screen freezes or you lose audio or something like that, the best way is just to rejoin. Okay. So Unanet is a platform that over 1,000 organizations trust to manage their pipeline, their projects, their people, and their financials. And this graphic attempts to summarize the software that we've been developing over the last 20 plus years. Today, we're really going to focus on the first column, the planning section. So pipeline management, forecasting, probability percentages. A lot of our customers' people are the primary driver of the revenue and the primary contributor of the cost for these customers. They're project-driven, professional services-based organizations. So being able to schedule people based on availability, skill set, location, etc., and then answer a variety of questions on the future: who's overbooked, who's underbooked, when do people become available, when do people with specific skills become available, are projects adequately staffed, what is the revenue forecast, what is the cost forecast, what is the margin forecast into the future. There is a skills repository in Unanet, as I referenced. There's a capability to do scenario planning as well, or what if analysis. So, what if we did the opportunity with 100% employees, or how would that compare if we did it 50% employees and 50% subcontractors? What's the impact to the margin? What's the impact to the schedule, etc.? We have customers doing pricing in Unanet, etc. So that's what I'm going to attempt to cover today. There are other areas within Unanet. Just briefly, the executing area is kind of the core: time and expense reporting, the approval workflow, the notes feature. The monitor area is the real-time analytics, all the reports you can run on burn rate, actual versus budgeted numbers, percent complete, utilization reports, billability reports, gross margin reports, net margin reports, backlog reports, etc. Invoicing gets into billing and revenue recognition, so billing and recognizing revenue for time and materials work, fixed price work, cost plus work, etc. And then the accounting area is kind of the full financials. So that's general ledger, income statement, balance sheet, accounts payable, accounts receivable, indirect rate calculations, and purchasing as well. But today, again, we're going to focus on the planning area, and that's budgeting, planning, and forecasting. So we've polled our existing customer base, and this is what our customers have had to say. Unanet is one database; it's one single source of truth. So oftentimes we talk to companies, and they have QuickBooks as their ledger, and they'll have some other time reporting tool, and maybe some other expense reporting tool, and maybe some other budgeting tool, and they'll also have like 8 or 9 Excel spreadsheets that are open at all times on their desk. We kind of consolidate that into one single source of truth. And because it is one single source of truth, it's all real time, it's all live data. So, instead of having to wait for the data to sync up with each other, everything in Unanet is live, it's all real time. So you can see the actuals against the plans immediately. For example, it's very intuitive. We'll get into that when we get into the software. It's 100% web-based. The majority of our clients, the vast majority of our clients, I'd say 95+%, are choosing to run Unanet in the cloud. We do have some on-premise customers. The functionality is exactly the same. It's all browser-based. It's just whether we're hosting the software for them or they're running on their own servers. We do host it at a AWS FedRAMP moderate environment, Amazon Web Services. It's on an Oracle enterprise database with encryption, so there's a lot of information on security that I'm not going to get into right now. We've heard consistently from our customers that they've been able to lower their G&A headcount and scale their business at the same time. So it's obviously significantly efficient. A lot of times customers or organizations are, really focused on growing the top line, which is obviously very important. Unanet helps grow the top line with the budgeting, the planning, and forecasting. And it also will help with the bottom line as well, reducing costs as you scale. And then forward is really what we're going to focus on today. The best way to see the future is to invent it. So we're going to talk about planning and forecasting and all the different permutations there. We have over 1,000 customers, as I mentioned. The size of employees is measured here in the y-axis. And people always ask me, well, what size organization really uses Unanet? And really, I say it's not about the size of the organization. It's, are they a project-driven, professional services type organization? Again, people being the primary driver of the revenue, the primary contributor to the cost. Do they need to plan, schedule those people? Do they need to look at, forecasted revenue into the future, availability of people, projects, etc. The other thing about this slide is, Unanet scales with our customers as they grow. So we've had several customers that have started with Unanet, with less than 20 employees, and now they're 900 employees. So we have very significant growth and scalability within the software. Just a little background on the company. We've been in production for over 20 years now. We're the highest rated project-based ERP on G2 Crowd. We've won the Washington Post Top Workplaces Award. We have a nationwide network of partners that implement the software and also refer the software. All of our development is done in Dulles, Virginia. We did the Inc. 5000 list of fastest growing privately held companies. And, we're self-funded, we're profitable, and employee owned. In addition to the software, we have, services around the software, and those are customer focused services. So we have their professional services team that works with all of our customers to get them up and running, configured correctly, trained on how to use the software, integrated with other systems. They work kind of hand in glove with the customer to make sure Unanet is delivering upon the desired outcomes. We also have the customer success team. So we have customer success and customer support. Success I describe as more proactive. They're actually out there pinging the customers, making sure the customers are optimizing the software, making sure the software is delivering upon those desired outcomes post the implementation, post the go live. And then customer support is more reactive. They field questions on how do I plan a certain person, with a certain skill set over time, or why isn't this value showing up on my report or something like that. And it's email and phone support. And the support is based in Dulles, Virginia and Denver, Colorado. And then there's a variety of self-service tools. We obviously have help documentation that's actually extremely helpful. All of this is publicly available as well, so if you want to go look at it, you can do that. The Knowledge Center is best practices that have been submitted by other customers. We have a YouTube channel. Next week, we're actually doing our Champions Conference, so that's where all of our customers get together. This is in San Diego. We have about 500 people attending, so it's a record crowd. And basically, they're discussing best practices, receiving training on the software, collaborating on the product roadmap. There's also a LinkedIn user group. We have cluster events, etc. So again, that's a little bit of background on the company. There's actually been several people that have joined since we first started. So I just want to kind of reiterate what I was saying in the beginning. You know, these webinars are always more compelling with questions from the audience. So if you have any questions as we go through this, please enter those through the question section of the GoToWebinar console, and I'll try to answer those as they come along. So one of the questions is, can you talk about the payroll integration and how robust functional it is? So, you know, we have over 1,000 customers, and they pretty much use every payroll system you've ever heard of, and you've probably never heard of. You know, ADP, Ceridian, Paychex, Paylocity, Payroll Network, PrimePay, Fidelity, Millennium, et cetera. Now, with some payroll services, we built Connect products where the employee is onboarded and created in the payroll system, and they automatically flow over to the to Unanet, so you don't need to enter the employee data twice. And then Unanet, you know, they'll log time and expenses in Unanet. Some companies reimburse expenses through accounts payable, some reimburse expenses through payroll. So if they are reimbursing expenses through payroll, Unanet will send the expenses back to the payroll system. It'll send the time data back to the payroll system. And then the payroll system will also create a journal entry for Unanet for the, you know, the 401k, FICA, et cetera. So it depends on what payroll system you're looking at, but we have, or what you currently use, we have a variety of different ones we integrate with. All right, hopefully that answered the question. So when someone authenticates into Unanet, it identifies who they are, and then based on their user privileges or their roles, it dynamically generates a dashboard type view. So as a role-based system, you can limit who can view information versus who can edit information, who has access to which customers, which opportunities, which departments, which employees, et cetera. So what we're seeing here is the combination of what we've chosen to see and what we're allowed to see. So again, you can restrict who can view information and who can edit information. And you can make these dashboards as simple or as sophisticated as you want. Obviously, this is a very sophisticated dashboard. It has a lot of charts, a lot of reports on the left-hand side. We've set it up this way because it allows us to answer 95% of the questions we get with 2 or 3 clicks of a mouse. Each of these menu items across the top represents a different dashboard. So you may have a dashboard that has nothing on it. It's entirely up to you as far as how you want to configure your dashboard. So this is the project dashboard with a sample set of charts and reports. This is the forecast dashboard with a sample set of charts and reports. So you can place the various charts and reports on the different dashboards. Okay, so we talked about people being the primary driver of the revenue and the primary contributor to the costs. So this is a sample report that shows us how people are planned to work across all opportunities and all projects. So let's just start with this, and I'm going to show you some of the background data, set up some of the elements that feed into this, and then kind of expand on this further. But quickly from this report, you could see, by department, by employee, who's overbooked in red, who's underbooked in yellow, when people become available, etc. So it's kind of a quick view that shows you the forecast of all your resources. And right now it's showing you just week over week here in the columns, just to give you a sense of the utility of Unanet. If I wanted to change this, it's kind of just a point and click interface. So I go back to the criteria. Instead of looking at it week over week, I could choose day over day, month over month, quarter over quarter, year over year. If I want to do it month over month, I just hit that button and I hit run report, and then this is a month over month view. You may have also noticed that I could have also saved the criteria, so I could give it a name. I name it here, and then I pick which of the dashboards I want to add it to. And again, the dashboards correspond to the menu items going across the top up here. So that's how you get the different charts and the different reports on the different dashboards. You can also save the criteria out and share it across multiple people. So instead of each person in the system having to build their own reports, you build these reports and views, and then you can share them out across the organization. All right, so again, this is basically showing by department, by employee. So how did we get all this data in Unanet? So basically in Unanet, we have a people side of the matrix and we have a project side of the matrix. So let's talk about the people side of the matrix. In Unanet, you could run a report that shows you your internal organization. And then under that, you could have as many different parent, child, grandchild, great-grandchild, as many levels deep as you want. The point of setting up this organization hierarchy or org chart basically is twofold. One, you can restrict access into the organizations. So if I'm in government services and I only want to be able to plan someone in government services, you could set it up that way. Two, you can report by the organization. So, if you want to say, show me everything for consulting services and its children, you could do that, or finance and its children, you could do that. So you can set up your different organizations, and then you can restrict the reporting as well as the visibility by the different organizations. We also have the concept of a business week in Unanet. A business week is how Unanet will determine someone's capacity for a future time period. It will look at their business week. So the default business week is 8 hours a day, 40 hours a week. You can set up different weeks. And again, this is how Unanet will determine their capacity when it looks at their business week. You can also set up a skills matrix, as we talked about. So you can create whatever skill types you want. These are just examples. Language could be a skill type, or programming could be a skill type. And then underneath these skill types, you can have more granular skills. So underneath language, we have Arabic, German, Mandarin, Spanish. Underneath programming, we have .NET, C++, Java. You can also have skill levels or proficiencies. So again, why am I showing you all this data? It's because if I go back to this report, if I wanted to say, show us our capacity for our Java programmers, or whatever skill we wanted to query on, we can say these are our 6 Java people and how they're, 4 Java people and how they're currently planned to work. So if we need a Java person, we can see Charlie is immediately available. Okay, so this is a list of all the people. Again, we're still on the people side of the matrix here, and you'll notice each person belongs to one of those organizations or departments that we set up. If we went into a person's profile, these are all the fields around a person: first name, last name, email address. Again, if you're onboarding them in certain payroll systems, this can be fed directly into Unanet, so you don't have to rekey the data. But this is where you'll have the business week associated with the person. This is where you'll have the location associated with the person. This is where you'll define the person's skills. This is also where the person would have rates associated with their profile. And these rates are default bill and cost rates that are date sensitive for effective rate purposes. You can also have project specific or task specific or labor category specific rates. But when we're doing forecasting, we can read from either this table or the labor category table or the project task table. We also have user-defined fields. So if we're not tracking something you want to track, you can create your own user-defined fields. So that's basically the people side of the matrix. Now, if we go back to this report, You'll notice if I go over Chad, there's a lot of click through or drill down in Unanet. So if I go over Chad and I click through, why is he overbooked? It's because he's booked on these projects. Okay. So it's kind of breaking out the allocation of his overbooking for us here. So it, it went from one line at, these different percent levels to being, by project, how he's overbooked. Now, in Unanet, we do have the ability to associate probability percentages with the projects, like 50% likely to win or 75% likely to win. So every project effectively can have a status associated with it. And if we include this probability percentage in the calculation here, then when we run that report, now he's not overbooked for June. So what changed that made him not overbooked for June? It's because when we click on this, 10, 10, 2, 3, 4, 5 is only 50% likely to happen. PSA upgrade is only 50% likely to happen. So it's doing that weighted forecast based on the probability percentage, or an expected value calculation based on the probability percentage. So underneath the people, you can have projects. So if we talked about the person side of the matrix, let's talk about the project side of the matrix. So on the project side of the matrix, you can define different project statuses. You can create whatever statuses you want here. These are just examples. But you could have your pipeline in here. So the idea is when you move an opportunity through the pipeline and then you win the work, you basically just flip the status switch and it becomes an open active project. This is just like I showed you a list of people, this is a list of projects. So these are direct and indirect projects. So every one customer could have many projects associated with it. Customer 1 has 4 projects associated with it. Customer 2 has 5 projects associated with it. You'll notice that all of these projects have statuses over here. So some are open, some are pipeline stages. So you can define different statuses for the different projects. If we go into a project and it was a pipeline stage project, again, if you win the work, you basically just flip the switch and you make it an open active project, and then all of the information around the project is retained. So the budgeted amounts, the start and end dates, the dollar amounts, the hours, total value, funded value, the work breakdown structure underneath the project. So when you're doing the planning, you can plan either at the project level or the task or subtask levels. You can go as many levels deep as you want there. Okay, so again, when we talked about, and by the way, every project will have a probability percentage associated with it. So this is where you're saying if you're including that probability percentage, include that in the calculation of the forecast. So when we look at something like this is again how people are planned across all projects. We could also look at a matrix view of this. So you could show the same data, excuse me, by person, by project. This is everything Darla is on. This is everything David is on. This is everything Dustin is on. Or you could flip the data around. You could invert the data like a pivot table concept in Excel. So instead of showing the data like we are now by person, by project, we could just simply flip the data and show it by project, by person. So this is everyone on 10-10-7011. This is everyone on 10 study X. This is everyone on big data. So the value in the cell can either be hours, dollars, or what we call FTEs, full-time equivalents. So again, just kind of showing you the ability to change things quickly on the fly. If we didn't want to show people, maybe we want to show labor category, and we didn't want to show hours, we would just go back to criteria. We say, don't show the people, show the labor categories, and show the FTEs, full-time equivalents, and then run the report. And now it's basically how many bodies do we have planned on projects. Question coming in, do project managers have full access to the project where a PM can approve time and expense billed to that project? So yes, Short answer is yes, but just to quickly kind of illustrate that, this is a project profile for this specific project. This project will have a project manager associated with it. We also have other roles in Unanet. So if the project approver is different from the project manager, you can set that up. But we also have, kind of sub project managers called project leads. But this is where you can say the project manager can approve on this project for, whether it's a purchase order related to this project or a purchase requisition in this project or a vendor invoice specific to this project, or, they can approve timesheet and expense report data on this project. And then again, you can sequence this with the line manager. So you have the project manager. If I show you something like this might better illustrate it. So, this is people's timesheets. We have a manager approval. The manager sees the entire timesheet or the entire expense report of anyone that submits to their group. You can have hierarchical manager approvers, so it goes to manager A and then B and then C, or for expenses, managers could, approve $500 or $1,000 or $2,000 or whatever. The project approver is more on a line item basis, so they only see the time or expense charged to their particular projects. And you can turn that on or off on a project by project basis. There's pros and cons to using it. The pros mean that the project managers review the charges on their projects. The cons mean it's just another step to get the timesheet or the expense report to the completed status where it's ready to be billed. But in this case, when Chad user submits his timesheet, Chris Director is his kind of functional manager, but he also charged to a project where George Washington required project approval. So hopefully that makes sense and answers your question. Okay. So this is a revenue forecast based on the probability percentages. And so this is for customer 1, customer 2. You can see these are 100% likely to win. Down here in customer 2, it looks like we're bidding on some work, so it's not 100% likely to win. And our grand total for the next 12 months here is 6.6 million on these 2 customers. Now, again, if you just remember that number for a second, 6.6 million, the weighted probability percentage applies. So before we were applying the probability percentage to the people kind of head count plan. Now we're applying it to dollars. So this is saying, again, weighted forecast, what we're expected to bring in. If we don't weight the forecast, so it was 6.6 million, and we decide not to use the probability percentage, you would expect that 6.6 million to increase, right? Because we're not factoring it based on a probability percentage, and now it's 9.3 million. Okay. And again, you can have different views of the pipeline in here. So this is a pipeline report that shows you, based on your stages, where things are, and then summarized pipeline. Okay, so we show you some of the reports and kind of the background data setup, but how do you actually do the planning in the system? So if we go under the forecast area, we have something called the People Planner. And what this does is basically present to, question coming in, is the expected value based on the P-win, 50% chance to win, equals 50% times the contract value is the expected weighted forecast. Yeah. So it's basically weighting the probability percentage, or the P-win, as some people call it in their lexicon, based on the plans into the future. You can also weight that P-win against other values in the project profile, like the total value, the funded value, any of the user-defined fields, etc. So there's basically math that you can create in Unanet. Okay, so how do you do the planning? This is kind of the People Planner. This is where we're saying, and these are all editable numbers. The colors are showing you how they're booked on other opportunities. So we can try to avoid overbooking them that way. You'll see on the search criteria, there's a variety of different ways you can pick the people to show up on that screen. But if you only want to say, only show me the available people, you could do something like that. Only show me people that are currently booked less than 1% of the time. You could set those colors we talked about to whatever thresholds you want here. You can look for people that have certain skills associated with their profile, people from specific locations, people from specific labor categories. And I should have defined this earlier. I didn't show you the difference between skills and labor categories. So let me go back there. So basically, you can define skills like we talked about, and a person could have 0 to many skills associated with their profile. You could also have labor categories. And the labor categories are similar to skills, but they're slightly different in that a person would have one default labor category associated with their profile, although they could be planned at different labor categories depending on what they're doing. The labor categories also have rates associated with them that have effective dates. And this is important because this gets into the concept of TBD resourcing, to be determined resourcing. Some organizations call this ghost resourcing or soft booking versus hard booking, but the concept is all the same. You can plan out basically a placeholder or a type of labor category, and then you can swap that out for a human being, and I'll show you how that process works. But this is the list of what we call master labor categories. Within each project, we have some people call this rate cards too, but within each project, we have project labor categories. So these are the list of valid labor categories on this content production project. And they could have different rates and different escalation dates associated with them for this particular project. So again, depending on what you're doing, who's doing it, you could either use the master rates, you could use the PLCs, or when you're assigning people to this project, the same person could actually have different rates depending on what they're doing. So if you look at Chad User here, on the brand strategy task, he's an administrator at $90 an hour. On the same project for the same customer on a different task, he's a designer at $115 an hour. So again, we can either use the person rate, the labor category rate, or we could actually just type in our own rate here. It can be whatever we want it to be. So the reason we started talking about that is, again, you can search for people to plan based on the labor category, the skills, the department. If you've worked with Joe Smith before and you want to work with Joe Smith again, you could do that. You could pick individual people. Shift or control is a multi-select in Unanet, so you can do something like that. You can do the planning in days, weeks, months, quarters. Most common is semi-months, months, and weeks. You can do it in FTEs or hours. So I think on the screen we just showed, we were doing the planning in what we call FTEs, full-time equivalents, or number of bodies. We could just as easily do that planning in hours. So if we hit the hours button, we do the planning, it just kind of converts those FTEs to hours. There's a lot of kind of bells and whistles that I'm not really going to get into, but you can, if you wanted to say something is pushed to the right, you can just do all this. You can just shift everything to the right, shift it to the left. You can populate vertically, horizontally. You can populate the entire grid with kind of limited keystrokes if you want to. You'll notice too, I did have an indirect project down here as well. So in addition to your billable work, some of our customers are actually planning all their work, their internal projects as well. And then they can, calculate their rates based on these. They can take these project level budgets and convert them to general ledger budgets and calculate their forward rates. Okay. So we do have the concept, and I referenced it, but I want to show it, of TBD resources, to be determined resources. So again, if you don't know who you want, but you know what type of resource you want, you can plan out that labor category, and then you'd be able to run a report or a chart that shows something like this, supply demand curve. So the purple bar is our number of humans, it's our supply or our capacity. The blue bar is our demand, it's our plan against that capacity. So we either need to hire people or reallocate people, and it shows you how that trends into the future. So if we plan these TBD resources, and again, they have default bill rates, they have default cost rates associated with them, they're burdened in a certain manner. When we find the human we want to take their place, we can do what's called a swap. So if I want to swap this business analyst out for Chris Director, who's the first row here, it basically just takes the plan that we had for the TBD and swaps it up to Chris Director. We also have the concept of scenario planning in Unanet, or plan sets. So under the umbrella of one opportunity or one project, we could actually create multiple scenarios. So I kind of referenced this in the beginning, but scenario one could be, what if we did the project with all employees? Or scenario two could be, what if we did the project with 50% employees and 50% subcontractors? Or scenario three would be 25% employees and 75% subcontractors. So oftentimes there's not a lot of margin on subcontractors, it's just a pass through, but it allows you to come up with different scenarios and see the impact of those scenarios on the margin, on the schedule, etc. We also have customers that use this for reforecasting. So some of our customers do reforecasting. You can reforecast monthly if you want to. A lot of customers reforecasting quarterly. So you can have different reforecasts and then compare the baseline versus the Q2 reforecast versus the Q3 reforecast, etc. Okay. In addition to planning out labor, you can also plan out non-labor, which is actually pretty straightforward. You basically just pick the project you want to plan it on, you put in the expense type, so you have the list of projects you're authorized to plan here, you have the expense type here, and then you put in the dollar amount, and you can go as far into the future as you want. Now this is where it gets very powerful, is we have this concept of indirect costs in Unanet, okay? So basically, you can define your fiscal years, whether it's calendar year, some other year, you can do that. You can go as far into the future as you want for multi-year forecasting. And then you can define different cost elements. So this is where you're creating your buckets or your categories or your labor or your other direct costs, and then for your indirect costs. So let me just talk about indirect costs for a second, because this is important. Fringe could be your benefits, right? Your fringe benefits, your 401k, your insurance, your vacation. We can take these costs and indirectly spread them out to your projects. Your overhead could be your rent or something like that. Your G&A could be your finance team or your admin team. So what we can do is take these cost elements and we can put them into different, what we call cost structures. And you can have as many cost structures as you want. And basically the cost structures allow you to allocate the elements differently across different people and different projects. So what this is saying is, for Division A, our labor is made up of these three components. All three components go into labor for Division A. For Division A, this is how we're bucketing our ODCs. So we're putting our ODCs into these four different buckets. And then for Division A, this is how we're calculating our indirects. So the way you read this screen is kind of like an additive calculator. Fringe is going to be labor multiplied by the rate. Overhead is going to be labor plus fringe multiplied by the rate. G&A is labor plus fringe, plus everything times the rate. And then these are our rates. So for each fiscal year, for each cost structure, we have three sets of rates. We have a target rate, a provisional rate, and an actual rate. So typically the target rate is used for kind of forecasting, sandboxing. The provisional rate would be your approved rate, and then your actual rate would be your historical rate that's actually calculated. And Unanet can calculate all these rates typically the target and the provisional are calculated based on the budgets, and the actuals is calculated based on the historical data. So if we have these rates in Unanet, what that allows us to do is go over here, and we can run a report that is our 2020 budget. So again, this is showing for 2020, next year, all of our planned labor, all of our planned ODCs, and then all of our planned indirects. So again, what are these values, right? So basically the fringe is the fringe benefit that's being spread out across all your projects, and it's a percentage. The way we defined it over here, right? The formula for fringe was labor times the rate, okay? And the rate for fringe in 2020 is roughly 33%, right? So if we look at this report, 203,000 times 33% is the 68,000 down here. Overhead is labor, the 203,000 plus the fringe times the rate, but the rate for overhead isn't 33%. The rate for overhead is 6%. So that's how we're getting these values. But the reason why this is important is we're not only showing you your gross margin, we're showing you your net margin once you take into account all of your other costs. So you can see, into the future, are you going to be, profitable from a net margin perspective or from a gross margin perspective, or both? So there's different reports, different layouts you can have here. But one example would be, if I run this margin summary report, one example would be, now I've kind of summarized the elements into different lines, and I'm showing us our gross margin as well as our net margin. And as you would expect, the net margin is significantly less than the gross margin, because the gross margin takes into account all the indirect costs. So yes, there's a question coming in. Are the fringe G&A overhead categorized based on DCAA compliance by default? We do have a Keystone starter database that has kind of best practices for calculation, setup of indirect rates. Obviously, the government does not approve any software in and of itself. They approve the processes and the policies and the procedures in combination with the software. That is your total DCAA approved system. We have several customers that have, literally hundreds of customers that have passed audits. But we do have a Keystone starter database that has the information that's set up by default. One other thing too I'd like to add is this is not just if you have to comply by the DCAA. This is basically best practice for any project-based professional services firm. If you're not allocating your indirects as shown in this report, your project manager could come to you and say, hey, look, we're predicting 1.3 million for next year. That's great. We're doing awesome. But once you take into account all the indirects, they really need to understand that this is what they're actually bringing home to the company after the fringe, the overhead, the G&A is all applied. So it's kind of just a best practice across all professional services. But yeah, certainly the default database complies with the DCAA rules in combination with, as I mentioned, policies, procedures, everything else. All right. One other thing I wanted to show, actually two other things, and I'll kind of just open it up to questions. There are pictorial representations of all of these reports. So if we wanted to show a chart that showed something like this, this is showing for this year and into next year. The bar, if you just stick with me here for a second, the bars are values measured on the left-hand side of the y-axis. The lines are cumulative numbers measured on the right-hand side. So you can see this is taking into account actuals and plans. So again, actuals coming from the time and expense and the POs and that sort of thing, vendor invoices, the plans going out into the future. So it's actuals through today plans as of tomorrow, and it shows, today is whatever, May 8th. So it's showing you forecasted data into the future, and it'll show you when you cross that 75% of the funded value, and you can kind of infer 60 days in advance of that. You can see when you're going to cross 100% of the funded value. There is a similar report format that displays EBITDA. Question coming in, that's kind of covered in the financials piece of this. We can create an income statement that shows the EBITDA with the indirects. There's one other thing I wanted to show. I'm trying to remember what it was. Oh, okay. So let me go over here. So this is for, and this kind of hammers home the point of having one single source of truth, one system for everything, rather than disparate Excel spreadsheets and other tools. Since Unanet can show actuals and plans, and we're showing actuals through 5.8 and plans as of 5.9, since we can do this, we can compare the actuals and the plans with the budget. So the budget over here, the original budget, less the actuals, less the plans, is our unallocated budget over here. So this should be close to zero in most cases, right? Budget less actuals, less plans should be close to zero in most cases. So how do we get that value to zero? Well, what we do, and this is for the big data project, we go to our forecasting tool, and we go to our people planner. And we can just throw some labor on the big data project. This is just an example to kind of illustrate the point. So if we save that, we've increased the labor, right? So budget less actuals, less plans is unallocated budget. So this 13,000 in hours should go down, right, when we refresh the report. So if we come up here, we click refresh report, and then over here, it did go down to 11,000 hours. So, a lot of our customers will have, 2 monitors at their desk, and they'll basically be planning and refreshing. And there's a lot of data, obviously, you need to take into consideration. It's kind of difficult to get it all on one screen, but I think you get the idea that, since it's all in one system. And the question is, how are the actuals getting in here? So the end user can actually, it's a role-based system. So when someone logs in and identifies who they are, and based on their user privileges, generates this view. This is just an end user putting in their time. So we're taking this timesheet data and consolidating it up to the actuals and the expenses and the vendor invoices and everything else. So again, since it's all one system, as soon as they save the data on the timesheet, it's immediately available in any of the reports, really. All right. Finished a little bit early. Happy to go into any other areas of Unanet or dive deeper into the planning and the forecasting. Again, if anyone has any questions, I'm sure somebody else has a question. So please submit those through the GoToWebinar console, and I'll try to answer them the best I can. Question coming in on hierarchies and reorganizations. So one of the major advantages of Unanet over other systems in the marketplace is that our organization hierarchy is not based on it's not based on the code. For example, in a lot of systems, the hierarchy of the organization is embedded into the code itself. So for example, if I ran a report that showed here, this is the hierarchy of the organization that we talked about earlier. If I ran this report and all of these sub-organizations are sub-organizations of GS, not because they begin with GS, but because they're explicitly set in the database. So, frankly, it's just better database design. We're explicitly defining a parent over here. So we have a financials parent, and then we also have a cost pools parent. You can also create other hierarchies with the user-defined fields as well. But the idea here is, if we wanted to move cyber under consulting services, we could do that from the financials perspective and save it. And then if we run this org tree view based on the financial hierarchy, cyber is now appearing under consulting services. So this is extremely beneficial when companies are going through M&A and they have all these codes that are basically, again, the hierarchy is hard coded or encrypted into the org code. Here it's much more flexible because you're simply relabeling the parent here, and then you're on your way. It's frankly just better database design. Sorry, more questions coming in. Any operating system limitations between PC and Mac? No, we have customers running on all different platforms, and it is mobile, 100% mobile enabled. We've also mobile optimized certain pieces of the software, like the timesheet entry, for example. So it's responsive web design. If I show you real quick, I showed you what the timesheet looked like from the kind of the end user perspective, but if you went to actually, let me show it to you in the help because I can't show you the background of a phone here. This is the help documentation. And if we go to our current documentation, again, this is publicly available if you wanted to look at it. But I'm just going to go to the mobile screen, and delinquent users will get email reminders, and those emails contain hyperlinks. They get the email, they click on the link, it brings them directly to their timesheet. This is the screenshot I was looking for. Sorry, it took me a while to navigate there. But again, I can't really display it on the screen now, but this is if you had a phone, this is what it would look like on your phone. Sorry, more questions coming in. Just bear with me, please. Sorry, there's a lot of questions coming in, so let me just find my place here. For direct projects, you can budget at either the task level or the project level. There are pros and cons to doing one or the other. What do you see as the best practice? I definitely would recommend starting off budgeting at the project level, or you're budgeting at this level. As you become more familiar with the system, then you can certainly move over to the task level. We have customers doing it, really all different ways. It kind of depends on their level of maturity. There's kind of a, crawl, walk, run, bike, car, jet, spaceship kind of approach to all of this. So If you're starting off, I would recommend budgeting at the project level. Yes, I did mention it. There is the ability to set up multiple rate structures for different divisions. So you can have as many different cost elements as you want, as we talked about, and then you can have as many different cost structures as you want. And the structures are what allow you to take these elements and apply them differently across different people and different projects. And we have some customers that have literally hundreds of cost structures in their system. You could upload data into Unanet. So any of the major objects could be uploaded. So that includes time, projects, customers, organizations, vendors. Basically, we have a pretty robust import-export utility with Excel where you can take the data and you can map fields in different ways. You can run functions against those fields. This looks like a bunch of gibberish to you, but this is how the data would appear in Excel. And then you could manipulate this data. Like say you wanted to change the employee's cost rate. You could come over here, make the change in mass, and then go back to Unanet and do an admin import. And you could upload the person data. All right. Can I elaborate on the possible revenue calculation methodologies embedded in the solution and whether companies have the ability to customize those revenue methods of calculations? I see the flexibility in your cost buildup where you define your indirect rates. Yes, so quickly I will do this. We do have a session. We have some, by the way, we have some videos on www.unanet.com/videos. If you wanted to check out other functionality in Unanet, or if you wanted to socialize these internally, you could certainly do that. The project billing and revenue recognition setup and revenue recognition usage goes into my question. So this is 23 minutes. I'm going to summarize this in 23 seconds. But under the setup area, you can define different hosting options. So for cost plus, you can bill based on provisional and recognize based on actual. For time and materials, RevRec is pretty simple. It's what's been worked, and then for fixed price, you can recognize the revenue based on different methods. So if you want to be GAAP compliant, you would recognize based on percent complete, or a revenue recognition schedule, where you define a schedule. If you're coming from QuickBooks, you're probably recognizing when billed, but you can do any of it. But if you want to be GAAP compliant, you recognize based on percent complete, or you would generate a schedule. And then there is a report in Unanet. It's one of my favorite reports, actually, so I will show it. That basically talks about what has been billed versus what has been recognized in revenue. So for time and materials, it's pretty much always going to be the same thing, right? The 659 is the 659, but you can see this deferred amount here. Some other systems call this unbilled, but it's basically, what's the difference between what's been billed and what's been recognized? And are you going to owe the client money at the end of the year, or is the client going to owe you money? All right. Yes, you can automate the import exports with our integration management utility, so you can schedule them to run whenever and however often you like, quote unquote, behind the scenes with no human intervention. So every hour, every 15 minutes, whatever frequency you want, you can push and pull those out of the system. All right. That was a flurry of questions at the end there, but I'm glad we got all those. I will put my email up on the screen here, and then if you have any questions, feel free to email me or contact Unanet. And I thank you for your time today. I want to respect your time. We are at the 1 hour. So thank you very much, and have a great day. I'll put my email up if you have any further questions.